Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. I'm Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the Fast Friday edition of the show for August 18th, 2023. And rather than me blabbing about some introduction about this episode on war, armies, and debts and taxes, instead I thought it was best to go right to James Madison, the father of the Constitution, to give us an introduction. And here's how he put it in Political Observations. He said, "Of all the enemies to public liberty, war is, perhaps, the most to be dreaded, because it comprises and develops the germ of every other." The father of the Constitution is telling us that war is probably, or perhaps, the greatest threat to liberty because it gives us so much. And what is that? He said, war is the parent of armies. From these proceed debts and taxes. And armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments for bringing the many under the domination of the few. Armies and debts and taxes, we have massive amounts of all in a trifecta today, and they all keep growing and growing and growing. And because of this type of a scenario, Madison also warned us that no nation, not some, no nation could preserve its freedom in the midst of continual warfare. And armies and debts and taxes, that's really our theme for today. I'm going to get to that a little bit more in just a moment, but a little bit here from Madison as well in another paper from Helvidius number 4 in 1793. He points out here that in no part of the Constitution is more wisdom to be found than in the clause which confides the question of war or peace to the legislature and not to the executive department. The smartest, the wisest part of the Constitution, one where they put a lot of thought into it, was separating the question of war or peace, that's the power to declare war, and the power to wage war, that goes to the executive branch. He said the trust and the temptation would be too great for any one man. That is so obvious. And he said war is, in fact, the true nurse of executive aggrandizement. So you're going to centralize power in the hands of a single person, and the more that a single person has consolidated power, the more they're going to wield that power in terrible, terrible ways. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details on the Constitution and war powers. I do have an episode that I want to refer you to, War Powers and the Constitution, an overview. It's a pretty detailed one discussing the powers to declare and wage war. And in the overview, it highlights that quote from James Madison talking about how this is the wisest part of the Constitution. Alan Mosley is doing the blog post on this episode, like he is doing all of them now, which is awesome. So we'll have that up over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty in the next few hours. And that way you'll be able to find this episode and all the other source documents that I'm referencing here today. So if you think about this concern about the danger of war powers, they went out of their way to slow down the process. Some people are like, oh, in modern times, using this declare war process means, we're all going to be in danger. But they understood what they were doing. The founders were not stupid. And they went out of their way to actually slow down the process because they understood at times where war was on the horizon, people would make rash decisions. And here's how James Wilson put it. This system will not hurry us into war. It is calculated to guard against it. So going out of their way to slow it down and to guard against getting into war. Here's John Jay, first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, writing in Federalist number 4. He said, "It is too true, however graceful it is too true, however disgraceful it may be to human nature, that nations in general will make war whenever they have a prospect of getting anything by it." So in other words, again, just like what James Wilson was saying in the Pennsylvania Ratifying Convention in 1787, and what John Jay is saying here around that same time in Federalist number 4 is, well, people are going to use these powers in bad ways, so we don't want them to have it easy to be able to get us into war. Here's Thomas Paine in the Crisis number 4 in 1778. He said, "If there is a sin superior to every other, it is that of willful and offensive war." So, of course, the emphasis for the founding generation, for the old revolutionaries, was on building relationships and peace, starting with peace. James Wilson, on his July 4th, 1788 speech, he did an oration on that day. He said, "Let us begin with peace." Here's George Washington in his farewell address in 1796. He said, observe good. This is his advice to his country. Observe good faith and justice towards all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all. And that's something that we've been ignoring for generations and generations. Same with Thomas Jefferson's approach in his first inaugural, just a few years later, 1801. He said, peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. So many people in power today, they don't like talking about peace. They want to tell us about threats and how much we need to be protected by them. But the founding generation so much focused on efforts towards peace, and it's something that's really, really missing today. If I can get this image to fit in the screen. Here's also John Jay again. He said, while there are knaves and fools in the world, there will be wars in it. So that's this over and over. People trying to trick the people who want to gain something, just people who are just evil. And then the fools who fall for all their trash year in and year out, decade in and decade out. And we're going to continue having that as long as there are knaves and fools in the world. And here's a little precursor to what Madison said in that opening statement. The precursor to it was Thomas Paine in 1791. Now, these were widely held views, but here's how Paine put it in The Rights of Man. War is the common harvest of all those who participate in the division and expenditure of public money in all countries. This isn't just in certain types of governments with certain power structures. It isn't only in certain areas. It's not just Europe. It's not just the East. It's not the West. It's everywhere. In all countries, war is the common harvest. They're harvesting of all those who participate in the division and expenditure of public money. He said, it is the art of conquering at home. War is about conquering your own people so you can go to that war. The object of it is an increase of revenue. And as revenue cannot be increased without taxes, a pretense must be made for expenditure. So he went on to explain how if you're studying the history of Britain, at least, because he's in a debate about that, the history of the English government, he pointed out that taxes were not raised to carry on wars, but that wars were raised to carry on taxes. Armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments for putting the many under the domination of the few. I cannot repeat that often enough. And speaking of armies, here's the great patriot war hero, Revolutionary War hero, Joseph Warren, in his Boston Massacre Day oration in 1775, telling us that standing armies, here's a guy who was fighting on the front line. Standing armies always endanger the liberty of the subject. It's not sometimes, it's not once in a while, it's not most of the time. It's always. And Samuel Adams, the father of the American Revolution, had the same view. He said a standing army is always dangerous to the liberties of the people. And we've got a massive one here today. And this is actually one of my new favorite, it's not a new quote, but it's something that I brought up and we shared over on Twitter. Spike Cohen pointed out, this might be my new favorite Jefferson quote, and I think it might be mine as well. So thanks, Spike, for that thought. But here he is in a letter in 1820. He said, it is incumbent on every generation to pay its own debts as it goes, a principle which, if acted on, would save one half the wars of the world. So connecting that idea of armies and debts and taxes. And I'm wearing the shirt as well, but here's one from Benjamin Franklin. And now, with many of Benjamin Franklin's best short quotes, a lot of people fail to see the deeper meaning behind it and only focus on the surface, the words themselves. And here it is. There never was a good war or a bad peace. And mind you, this was right after Benjamin Franklin had finished negotiating the Treaty of Paris, bringing an end to the war for independence, the war against the empire. And of course, he was so influential in bringing the French in to help fight that war as well. But he's not just saying that you're not going to ever be involved in a war, reject them all, because of course, he was part of that Revolutionary War, that war for independence, and he played a very influential role as well. So he's recognizing that no matter what the motive, whatever the situation, war is a terrible, terrible thing, and we shouldn't be wishing it upon anyone. And peace is what should be our goal at all time. And I think this is a message that we're missing all across the political spectrum today. And I hope this short take from the founders, the old revolutionaries, helps put that thought of peace first and foremost in your mind, like it is with me as well. Now, a little bit about my own history. I started out, I know I've talked about it a little bit on this show, but I started out as, well, an avowed commie, a Marxist, a Trotskyite. I may have been a terrible one, but that was kind of what I held on to. I was raised in a very socialist area in government-run schools that taught me that the solution to every problem was government. Government was going to come in and protect us and save us from anything and everything. And even if the problem was government, you just needed more government to solve it. And I was very early on in my activism days, I got involved in the anti-war movement in the war for Iraq, war against Iraq. That was launched by George Bush and company back in 2003. And I quickly became disillusioned because I recognized that the people in that kind of those coalitions, even though I'm on board with the idea that they were rejecting war, they really weren't. Underneath, over a period of a number of years, I recognized that underneath, they really weren't being against war. They were actually just against spending on the war, and they wanted to bring all that money home and spend it on social programs. Less war, more healthcare. Less war, more schools. And I get the draw of that message. But a country or an organization that's willing to spend trillions of dollars dominating the globe, killing innocent people over and over and over, these are not people that should be trusted ever with the most important issues for your friends, for your family, for your neighbors, for anyone, whether it's healthcare, education, or anything in between. Anyways, I wanted to share that short personal story. I hope you enjoyed this quick take here. I hope it made you think. I hope you learned something. Of course, if you want to help us get this kind of message out to more people, nothing helps us get that job done more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. I'd be very, very grateful for any consideration you can give to joining us as a member today. There's also annual, lifetime, and 5-year options over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Again, thank you so much for watching the show today or listening to it. I hope you have a great weekend, and I hope to see you next week here on the Path to Liberty.